Tomorrow's breaking news has always been known to God. Through the prophets, He told us amazing things about our own day, and He said them thousands of years in advance. As I do occasionally, I want to take a quick look at 6 of the prophetic signs of the end times. I can't cover everything. This is merely a snapshot, but it will give you an idea of how quickly things are happening in these last days. We'll start in America in the great state of Louisiana in Terrebonne Parish. A brain-eating amoeba has been found in the public water system. The amoeba causes brain swelling and tissue destruction. By itself, this would not be a sign, but pestilence of all types are on the rise everywhere. And according to Jesus in Luke 21:11, pestilence are a major sign leading up to the Lord's return. In China, officials have discovered a new pestilence that could be world-shaking. The Scottish Sun ran the headline, "Disease X Fears, Terrifying New Strain of Bird Flu that Kills Over a Third of Those Who Contract It Discovered in China, Amid Fears of New Global Pandemic." The 1918 Spanish flu was one of the 2 deadliest disease outbreaks in world history. It killed between 50 and 100 million people. During the epidemic, life expectancy in the United States declined by 12 years. But this new bird flu in China has more than twice the mortality rate of the 1918 flu. Sometimes these things simply die out, and that might happen here. Or this new flu could become a monster that ravages human population the world over. At the time of the Sun's report, 1,600 people had been infected. Of them, more than 600 had died. Folks, this could be a bad one. Jesus also said there would be wars and rumors of wars. Last week, Turkish President Recep Erdogan warned of a coming war between the cross and the crescent. In other words, between Islam and Christianity. This is a leader of a NATO country threatening a religious war between the world's 2 largest religious groups. Between them, they represent almost 60% of the world. Jesus said, "As the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man." Genesis 6:11 says that in the days of Noah, the earth was filled with violence. Last week in Germany, officials started a ricin attack. Ricin is 6,000 times deadlier than cyanide. It causes a horrible, painful death. It could have been a terrible tragedy. Radical Islamic terrorists are scattered around the world, and they are bent on 2 things. They want to spread the sickness of their radicalism to those who will receive it, and they want to destroy everyone else. Terrorism has become so common in much of the world that the Western press rarely reports it now. But make no mistake, the earth is once again filled with violence, and it's not just coming from radical Islam. The Washington Post reported last week on a middle school in Maryland where gang-related fights have become an almost daily occurrence. The culprit? MS-13. According to the Post, they throw gang signs, sell drugs, draw gang graffiti, and aggressively recruit students recently arrived from Central America, according to more than 24 teachers, parents, and students. Most of those interviewed asked not to be identified for fears of losing their jobs are being targeted by MS-13. This is a middle school in Maryland. I could give hundreds of other examples. Many otherwise peaceful Americans watch so much violence on TV that they've become addicted to the adrenaline rush, and they don't even realize it. God hates violence, but the world today is in love with it, just as the Bible predicted. Several places in Scripture warn that human sexuality will be turned upside down and inside out in the last days. A couple of weeks ago in Connecticut, the girls' track championship was dominated by two boys who feel that they are really, in some spiritual sense, girls. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32 lays out the pattern of what happens when a society rejects God. It tells us that sexual confusion is a powerful sign of civilization's moral deterioration. Last week, the U.S. House approved a ban on child sex robots. I'm glad they did that, but I'm horrified that they needed to. Romans chapter 1 is both historic and prophetic. It has happened in the past, but it also gives insight into what's happening now. It is a prophecy of the last days because when it happens simultaneously around the world, Christ either has to rescue humanity or humanity will destroy itself. If I had to pick a single verse to sum up Romans chapter 1, it would be verse 28. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind. Real knowledge is in God, and if we reject Him, our minds go into all kinds of terrible places. That manifests itself in many ways, including the most obvious. Humans are actually getting dumber. Even with advanced education and with all the toys designed to stimulate brain function in children, humanity is growing more stupid. That's what scientific study after scientific study has been telling us. CNN reported last week IQ scores have been steadily falling for the past few decades, and environmental factors are to blame, a new study says. The new study they have referred to is different only in that it blames the environment. But it is just one of a series of studies that show a definite drop in IQs over the last few decades. Humanity is getting dumber. But the depraved mind of verse 28 refers to far more than IQ. As I've said in the past, it refers to a mind so perverted it cannot think in its own best interest. Today, we're watching Great Britain reject the things that made it great and embrace its own destruction. Last week, I discussed Tommy Robinson and Britain's unjust decision to jail him for simply telling the truth. Without due process, he was sentenced to 13 months in jail. The judge then put a gag order on all British media, ordering them not to speak about his arrest, his so-called trial, or his sentence. In the last few days, he's been moved to a prison where 71% of the inmates are Muslim. He gets death threats regularly, and an imam has ordered a hit on Tommy. But British authorities don't seem to care. They have reportedly kept him in the main wing of the general population of the prison. They are not only protecting the forces of their own destruction, they're fighting alongside those forces. That is the work of depraved minds. Jesus predicted Israel's destruction, but he also predicted it would exist again near the end. He wasn't alone. He was following the prophetic pattern of the entire Old Testament. If Israel did not once again exist as its own nation state, then none of the other signs would matter. But it does exist, giving urgency to the other signs. Today, Israel continues to face an onslaught of unreasoning rage. So far this year, Israel's security agency, Shin Bet, has stopped 250 terror attacks against their country. One of the foiled attacks would have been a massive suicide bombing in Jerusalem. Last week, Gazans continued their campaign against Israel's cities near the border. Using incendiary kites and balloons, they've been able to start dozens of fires in Israel. Some of those fires turned into raging infernos. In another development, the Israeli Air Force was able to find, bomb, and destroy a Hamas terror tunnel. That would hardly be news except for the fact that this tunnel was underwater. The tunnel would have allowed terrorists to secretly leave a Hamas base on the sea and enter Israel from the Mediterranean. Hamas has been spending vast resources on its ability to assault Israel from the sea. In May, Business Insider reported Israel has begun building a massive underwater border with the Gaza Strip, which it calls impenetrable. The massive barrier will consist of 3 security layers, which include armored stone and barbed wire. Last week, Israel announced that it will soon be deploying a new supersonic missile designed to destroy high-value targets. According to the Jerusalem Post, the missile can be fitted to the Israeli Air Force's F-15, F-16, and F-35 fighter jets and is meant to be dropped outside areas protected by air defense systems. A spokesman for the missile developer, Israel's Aerospace Industries, said it can be detected, but it is very hard to intercept. It can operate day or night and in all weather conditions. Also, in other Israel news last week, the UN General Assembly condemned the Jewish state for excessive use of force against Palestinian civilians. They asked UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to recommend an international protection mechanism for the Palestinians. Try to imagine any other nation on earth not defending itself against a massive invasion at its border. The other nations condemned Israel for doing exactly what they would do. I believe Israel has shown remarkable restraint. It fights a terrorist group, Hamas. Hamas hides its missile launchers in hospitals and schools. They build terror tunnels, one that went under an Israeli kindergarten. They fly incendiary balloons across the border. They order tens of thousands of their citizens to storm the border. They randomly lob destructive missiles into Israel. The Jewish state's response has been strong but measured. Yet somehow, the UN paints Israel as the villain. It seems obvious to me that the world's unreasoning hatred of Israel stems from millennia of unreasoning hatred of Jews. And that, I believe, comes from the fact that God chose them for some very special purposes. God chose them, so Satan hates them, again, just as the Bible prophets warned.